Coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borag Thung Athletes, and welcome to the latest episode of the 2000 AD Thrillcast Lockdown Tapes. I am your host, as always, Mulch R. So we only had one episode last week. Things have been obviously quite stressful out in the world, so I hope you're staying safe and trying to keep sane if you can. On this episode, we talk to Rob Williams and Alex de Campi. This week's 2000 AD is one of our periodic jumping on issues where all the stories start at part one. So it's the ideal time for new and lapsed readers to jump on board and start reading 2000 AD again. And if you go along to 2000ad.com, you'll see that we've got some offers running on 2000 AD subscriptions at the moment, particularly digital ones. So if you subscribe digitally with a monthly subscription, you get the first half of your first month free. So when that's combined with the free back issues that you get, then you can basically get 8 comics for the price of 2. So head along to 2000ad.com. Check out those offers. That offer is only available from if you subscribe to the 2000 AD web shop, but if you register on the app with the same details as the web shop, then you can download all your purchases and your subscriptions on the app for the digital device of your choice. In this prog, which is 2184, we've got 5 thrills. We've got Judge Dredd, which is a brand new brand new story from Rob Williams, Colin, MacNeil and Henry Flint, which is going to hopefully build into something very nice. We'll talk to Rob about that in a second. We've got Sinister Dexter by Dan Abnett and Steve Yoel. We've got a new series of The Order, which is a kind of time-bending meta-narrative that involves, in this episode, a jalopy, which is quite nice. We've got a brand new Future Shock, which has been written and drawn by Chris Burnham. Chris is an artist who, if you have any interest in American comics and Batman, for example, then you'll know Chris's work. Big 2000 AD fan. We've had him on the podcast before. And we've got the beginning of the Diabolics, which is the Kabbalistics Inc. spin-off series by Gordon Rennie and Dom Reardon, which I've been very much looking forward to as it's been in development. That's the lineup. It's an absolutely cracking prog to jump on board with. Even if you've got an ongoing subscription, make sure you check it out. And in this episode, like I said, we're talking to Rob Williams. We're also talking to Alex de Campi, who's the writer on Full Tilt Boogie. Now, Full Tilt Boogie was a series that debuted in 2000 AD Regened, one of our all-ages issues last year. That almost immediately went to a full series. So that's debuting in Prog 2185 in a week's time. Great to talk to both Rob and Alex. Before we crack on, I do need to let you know something, and that is that this episode is spoilers heavy. Now, you have been warned. Don't complain if you get stories spoiled for you. Both Rob and Alex do drop spoilers, at my instigation, let's face it, about the new series so that we could delve into them a little bit. But like I said, there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Do not listen to this episode until you have read the stories we are talking about. Yeah, no complaining. We'll crack on now with the interviews as we kick off with Rob Williams talking spoiler heavy about End of Days. So you're almost like a weekly fixture on the podcast, but
I am.
Welcome back, Rob Williams.
Hello.
Now, End of Days begins in the Jumping On prog, which is 2184, which is out fairly soon. Do you want to tell us, without too many spoilers, what the premise is of this new Big Dredd story?
End of Days is kind of what it says on the tin. Really, it's the end of the world has come. A gigantic storm sort of envelops the earth, and the nuclear missiles in the silos start overheating of their own accord, not just in Megacity 1 and various other spots around the planet. And then a lone rider comes to Megacity 1, to the war, rides towards out of the cursed earth at night where the moon is red overhead, and comes looking for the sheriff, as he calls him, which, as we all know, is Judge Dredd. And this rider has a message which might help Dredd and Anderson and a small team save the world.
There is going to be a pretty heavy spoilers warning on this episode of the podcast, so I think it is okay to talk a little about who this Lone Rider is, because it is one of your other characters. You want to tell us a little bit about that? It
is, and I said, but I don't think anyone could predict who would turn up in this story, because it's Ichabod Azrael from the Grievous Journey of Ichabod Azrael and the Dead Left in His Wake, which is a supernatural western that I wrote a few years ago for 2000 AD, which was initially drawn by Dom Reardon and then afterwards drawn by Mike Dowling. And Ichabod exists in a completely different reality universe. It's nothing remotely Dredd related. So for Ichabod to turn up, which is what got me excited. I don't know where the story came from, to be honest with you, but I just had this idea, this image of Ichabod riding for the Great Wall, with an urgent message to bring to Dredd, and the story kind of went from there. Really, I just like the idea of he shouldn't be here. This makes no sense whatsoever that he is here. So just that fact sort of immediately stirs up the sort of feelings of gravitas of a story, that this must be big, because for this character to suddenly come here asking for Dredd, hopefully should be a little almost like a wee sort of trifecta moment where the readers would kind of go, "Hey, what?" and our story follows from there.
Because the Western has been something that you've obviously played with before, with Ichabod Azrael, but I'm interested in the appeal of the kind of portentous language that the series had, and I mean, I guess that must be quite alluring to bring that sense of gravitas and threat to the world of Dredd, where you've got somebody who's relatively monosyllabic and is being faced with these big things, and just I've read the first couple of episodes, and it's basically him just going, "Yep."
Yeah, well, I mean, Dredd is the ultimate stoic character, right? You're not going to get more than 2 words out of Dredd. Ichabod, when I initially wrote Ichabod, I deliberately, bloody-mindedly did it as a kind of as a verbose character, and even the title, it was there's this thing at the time that 2000 AD title should be Strontium Dog Judge Dredd, like 2 words, boom, boom. So we called it The Grievous Journey of Ichabod Azrael and the Dead Left in His Wake, which was kind of like a mission statement that this is going to be everything that you're told you shouldn't do with these stories, and just anyone who speaks said. It was quite challenging to write at the time, but quite enjoyable. It was very lyrical and poetical, and the language they just didn't talk the way sort of we do in modern times. So to sort of to team up sort of Ichabod with Dredd is a kind of opposites attract type of thing. At one point in End of Days, Ichabod says something, and Anderson says, "Oh, great cowboy thesaurus speaks." Which is kind of like who Ichabod is, because I did, when I write Ichabod, I do reach for the thesaurus quite a bit, basically, to find out sort of the most difficult way of saying something occasionally. But there is also like I say, a romanticism in the character and in that era, and which I quite enjoy.
You've had a few sort of significant storylines under your belt as regards Dredd, quite often bringing in supporting characters of your own creation. Is this just something that you enjoy doing? You like crafting your own sort of cast of characters and seeing how they play off against each other?
It's probably laziness, because I can just reach back into the bag and sort of pull out people. No, I don't know. It's not deliberate. It's just when we did the small house, that was pulling together a bunch of different threads which I'd written over maybe a decade, and that was just it was just an organic sort of natural culmination of those storylines. It wasn't there was no great plan to kind of go, oh, I'll pay this off in 10 years time. It's just and with this, with pulling Ichabod in, it was just purely an idea that got me excited. And then if you're going to do that, I kind of felt like I wanted to do that sort of Judge Childy kind of epic, where Dredd and a small group head off in a ship and have to go from point to point, and it's very much a kind of road movie, through Dredd's world, and as you'll see as we progress. I mean, the general idea is the fact that the four horsemen have come, and Dredd and his team have to go and find the four horsemen and kill the four horsemen. But the four horsemen are not your traditional, what you think of them in terms of, you'd think of them like dark judges, like Judge Death and things like that, which, I mean, there's a reason there's four dark judges. They're kind of the four horsemen in their own way. These four horsemen are much more like sort of as spirits who, as the story explains, it's like they're not supernatural entities who come here and go, we're going to end your world. We've screwed it up. We've messed the world up. They just come and sort of inhabit someone who's already put the world in a position to end. And the four horsemen just give them one tiny last little nudge. But all the groundwork has been done by humanity. So it's really, there's a few little thematic things as we go where you'll see, which have some resonance with modern day politics, perhaps, where you'll see sort of the individual places that Dredd and his team have to go to. They've got the world, one step away from Armageddon anyway, and then so it's not so much. There is a little bit of both in it, but don't expect sort of a new Judge Death out of this particularly.
The supernatural in Judge Dredd is always something that seems to have worked really well, going all the way back to something like The Haunting of Sex House 9. There's been werewolves and all sorts of. Dredd jailed Satan at one point, and then a giant alien turned up, claiming to be Satan, etc., etc. It's always surprising how easily the supernatural and the spiritual fit into what is a sci-fi dystopia.
Yeah, and it has always been. And I look at Anderson, and Judge Death, for instance. But I mean, every Anderson storyline is dealing with that side of it pretty much. I think what's great as you, just like with the city and the crazy and Dredd's the straight man. It's just another aspect of that. The supernatural is the crazy stuff. Dredd is the straight man. Dredd cares not one jot that it's supernatural. It's just like one more creep, basically. I think there's a line I wrote in one story where he said he'd faced the supernatural, he'd put his fist through the supernatural. You know what I mean? It's just if he can punch it or shoot it, then that's fine. Yeah, and I think this is part of the reason why Dredd is such a brilliant character and works so well, is no matter what insanity you face him with, he's like, just one more crime to deal with, basically. He's so sort of he's very linear, bless him.
With sort of major storylines, particularly where you're dealing with the destruction of the city, let's say. Now, you did this partly with Trifecta, with Simon and Al. Is it difficult to where you essentially know that a character is going to survive, maintain a notion of a level of peril, and also, hasn't Mega City 1 been through enough?
Mega City 1 definitely has been through enough. I think the Apocalypse War and then Chaos Day. How many people died in Chaos Day? This is something like 400 million or something, was it? 450 million in Chaos Day.
Yeah, something like it went down to about 50 million, which is roughly the population of what, New York State or something.
Yeah, it has, and in fairness, that's something I didn't, as you'll see as the story continues, I didn't want to sort of labor that too much, because I think it has been through. You know, once you set up the threat, which is to the world, not just to Mega City 1. I mean, basically, this entire reality is at the end. I think Anderson in the story says something like, "These things are sort of we're always going to come. They're written into our system. There comes a point where in any reality whereby it's time for it to end now. You know, and so the Four Horsemen come as part of that. So this is an equal opportunity Armageddon. It's not coming down on Mega City 1 alone. It's coming down everywhere. And you'll see as Dredd and his team travel around, you'll see some other sort of characters from different parts of the globe will be involved as well, without giving too much. It's very global, and the stakes are about as high as they could possibly get. But then the trick always comes from trying to make this a personal story for Dredd and for the main characters. You know, you can easily get lost in the scale of something, and after a bit it becomes white noise. You know, a story only matters if you care about the characters at the heart of it and the choices they're making. And you know, if we've done our job right, then you know, we're putting these characters in some pretty horrible places where, you know, there are genuine stakes for them. But yeah, that's part of the trick.
And the nature of the mega epic, the big storyline, seems to have changed over the time between now and the Apocalypse War. It used to be a very rare event. It used to be something that had major implications, but with a sense of diminishing returns. I think I've read something about, by the time you get to kind of Doomsday for Dredd, the notion of the mega epic is fundamentally changing. It's becoming more sprawling. It's becoming more structural rather than necessarily, you know, all about Dredd in that moment. But I noticed that you referenced the Judge child there. For you, is the epic all about the personal, all about actually the small actions within the wider crisis? So it's less kind of day of chaos and more, as you say, that kind of little band of intrepid survivors.
Well, it is in this case because you're dealing with big, you know, actions and big themes. You realize that sort of, you know, the smaller you can get in the moments, that's what counts. That's what people is going to make it work for you or not. You know, when I was writing the ending of End of Days, there's a couple of scenes, you know, which are, you go small in those moments, you know, because it's a bit like I don't know, if you think of something, I don't know why I'm thinking of this, but like Revenge of the Sith, and at the start of a space battle, you've got a billion things going on, and you just don't focus on anything because it's too big, it's too much explodio and everything, and nothing means anything. So yeah, it's got to have stakes, you know, to matter. But again, I keep coming back to it has to have personal stakes, and at the end of the day, it's quite a small story about 3 or 4 people by the end of it. And what happens to them, and that'll decide, you know, if those moments have sort of like emotional resonance for readers, that'll decide whether or not, you know, it's any good. It's easy to blow things up. All you do as a writer is go, and the city explodes. You know, it's not particularly interesting. Although, you know, Henry Flint and Colin MacNeil could probably make it look pretty.
Well, I was going to ask about Colin and Henry, because have you worked with Colin before?
No, never. No. So it's a thrill, actually. It's yeah, I don't know how. That's not remotely intentional. It's just and I've always thought of Colin as, you know, Colin works with, I'm sure he's worked with other people, but Colin works with John Wagner. So and again, it's you're a fan, and I read America and things like that, and the Chopper stuff, years ago, and so when you find yourself working with these people, it's always a little bit of a shock, and and a treat. Actually, it's really nice.
With Henry's stuff, it felt particularly with the Small House that you two had really got into your stride as a partnership. Was the inclusion of Colin intentional, or was it just scheduling from an editorial point of view?
It was a bit of both, really. I mean, Matt and I, Matt Smith and I, the editor, that we sort of chat a bit with any stories I do usually, and just sort of go, who's drawing it. And I'm a bit at this old and jaded point in my career. I'm a bit wary of just handing a script in and I don't know who's drawing it. I just always think it comes out better if it's someone who I know suits what I'm writing for, because every artist got strengths, and every artist probably got things they're not quite as good at as well. And I can write a script which is aiming for one thing, and if the artist is their strengths are in other areas, you just come at it from a different point of view. So I've worked with Henry so often now, and Henry's just amazing and brilliant, and I know anything I write Henry will pull off. So he's pretty much my first port of call really with these type of things. And then Matt said, "Oh, Colin's available," and Colin, because this is 15 parts. So Matt said, "Oh, well, Colin can do a good chunk of it, and Henry can do a good chunk of it," and it just seemed like that was a really nice way to do it, really. You know what I mean? But I think these days asking any artist to do 15 parts on their own is probably not too realistic. I don't know, maybe it is. But I got new pages in from Henry last night, and Henry just really, what I love is he really leans into the more kind of outro aspects to the script, without giving too much away. When we go, by the nature of this being vaguely supernatural aspect to it, some weird things happen, and Henry just doesn't. He if you've seen his stuff like Shakara and whatever, when you go to a more kind of cosmic place, Henry just thrives on that kind of stuff. It just gets very weird, but somehow still stays grounded as well, but by the nature of it. So but yeah, I'm very fortunate. We got two fantastic Dredd artists, two absolute classic Dredd artists. If you want to look back on the pantheon of 2000 AD artists, we've got two of the best.
This series isn't really going to do anything about those people who think you're obsessed with horses, because it is a motif that has popped up previously. Do you want to explain a little bit about where this came from?
It's probably all based around my love of the why the long face joke, which is very important. No, it came out of nowhere. I mean, I know it's become a thing and a recurring motif for Dredd, which I do love, but because I think it suits him, because he is, and the whole thing with Ichabod in this, of it bringing in the Western aspect and Ichabod turning up and asking to see the sheriff. Dredd kind of is the sheriff. The cursed earth is the American West, albeit sort of hugely exaggerated. But no, the horse came about, I think, because I asked Henry Flint before we were doing Enceladus. I said, "What do you want to draw?" And he said, "I really want to draw Dredd on a horse." And I went, "Yeah, that completely works. I want to do that as well." I think prior to that, I'd written, I did The Man Comes Around, which again is Johnny Cash and Westerns, and I did R.M. Guerra drew that, and that was a little one-off where Dredd sort of faced his own death and saw a black horse, which was emaciated and starving, which is all just imagery from Johnny Cash. And then it just went from there. But I'd say one of the best characters I've ever written is the talking horse in Ichabod, who again was totally unplanned, just popped up. So maybe my subconscious goes towards horses, and I don't know why. And one of the best bits of dialogue I've ever written is the talking horse saying, "Be aware, I've defecated." So that's the kind of sophistication we're going for here. But yes, I did know. I was aware that certain people would go, "Oh God, he's gone on horses again." So spoilers: the talking horse isn't in this story throughout. He appears initially. Chief Judge Logan says he speaks, and Chief Judge Logan says, "There's a talking horse now," and I think the talking horse says something like, "Will there be room for me upon this mission?" And they're just like, "No, there is not." Because I thought keeping a talking horse in it throughout might be a bit much.
Well, it's that. I guess it's an example of the kind of levity that you need in any kind of grim epic. This seems to be something that is an ongoing theme in your writing and also Al's as well. Just kind of peppering things with a little bit of fun. I mean, the classic example is Dirty Frank, who's again, massive spoilers. Turns out not dead.
What? Yeah, might not be dead, possibly not dead. Yeah, he's been. Turns out he was in Hershey all along as this character Rijkaard, which was the clue was the fact that I named Rijkaard because there was a Dutch footballer called Frank Rijkaard, so he was called Frank all the way along. Just no one knew. That's the stuff I love writing, and I think the best writing can sort of will keep you off balance in as much that it can be very sad, it can be very dramatic, but there can be humor as well, and sort of I think those are the characters that I love and the writing that I love can very often sort of it's important to undercut a lot of the more portentous aspects of when you write a story, especially like this. Yeah, you've got to have a good few laughs in there. But Frank is probably my ultimate 2000 AD character in as much that he did both. He was just he's a very tragic character, but he's also immensely funny as well, and possibly he uses that humor as a sort of as a barrier, so you don't get near the Aurora stuff. But we've all seen the Aurora stuff now because we read The Small House, so we see where he was coming from all this time. But yeah, I love that stuff.
With stories like Titan and the ones that span off from it, I very much got the sense that you were saying something about Dredd, and we've talked about it on the podcast before. With End of Days, are you trying to say something different about Dredd? Is there's some element of this story that is kind of making your mark in terms of your view on him as a character?
I don't know. I mean, if you want to get heavy with it, there's a bunch of themes in it, but predominantly, especially towards the end, it's about staring death in the face. Basically, it's called End of Days. It's partly just as Dredd was about when the Titan in Titan was partly the Saturn moon, but it was partly Dredd himself. It was an exploration of Dredd as an icon compared to a man, and I wanted to sort of like I think so often we see sort of the iconic figure, but then it was trying to dig in underneath. I mean, End of Days is I like writing old man Dredd. I like the fact that it's getting harder and harder for him, but he keeps going through strength of will, and unfortunately for that world, regardless of the politics of it, probably no one alive who's ever lived has ever had such strength of will as Dredd does. You know what I mean? Like, and this is another example of that. I think there is a point towards the end, without giving too much away, where it's like, well, can he keep going? And what does he need to keep going? And I think that's the kind of questions. And I think something, again, I'm not going to give anything away, but in the final act, it does kind of, no, I'm not going to give anything more away. But it's about, it's about facing death effectively and looking into the face of death and how you react to that.
assuming that work on this began last year, how do you feel about starting a strip called End of Days in the middle of a global pandemic?
Well, I mean, there is one of the chapters is about a a fatal disease. Basically, that's there's pestilence is one of the four horsemen, and we wrote that before any of this. I wrote that before any of the COVID stuff came about, and you do kind of go, oh god, it's not. It got a little uncomfortable, and when you didn't know where the COVID stuff was going as well, where we are at the moment. Fingers crossed, it seems to be slightly, leveled. We'll see where we go going forward, and I hope that can, things get better and we get vaccines and things. But when it was getting really hairy, I was kind of thinking, well, I'm not entirely sure this is the right time for this story, to be honest with you, because it's all right to write that stuff when it's fantasy and it's not happening, but when you're actually, turning on your telly and looking out your window and the effects it was having. So that is an interesting aspect of it, certainly. But then also it was, there's the climate emergency stuff again, which is again is in here, and I did get a little wee point when I started out on this journey. Think, oh, this would be a fun story to write. And then you kind of went, oh dear, no, we need a bit of levity, so a bit of slapstick quickly, you know what I mean? So it's quite reflective, unintentionally so, of some of the things that are going on. It's not quite. I'm not saying I'm the Grant Morrison thing where what did he say? He wrote a character with a flesh-eating virus eating his face, and then he got a flesh-eating virus eating his face. I've donned the fiction suit, Michael.
I mean, you've got the hairstyle to go with it.
Yes, I have. I have not yet been visited by aliens from a ninth dimension, but who knows? It's early.
Grant, in terms of structuring something like this, what's your process? Do you start by plotting it out, or do you kind of feel your way?
No, it's my process for anything I write for 2018 is largely I'll plot it out, I'll structure it out, I'll send it to Matt. Matt will come back with some good notes. Which probably means me amending one or two things. And then as I start to write, it tends to veer off in different directions occasionally. And Matt's very good at, because I stay within, I'm big on structure, and I have to stay within hitting certain beats which I've laid out at the start. But then very often I will go off left or right in unintentional directions, because things will just, fall in your lap, and you kind of go, well, this is the right way to go, but you've always got to come back to these key beats, and then certain things I just always leave open, and there was a couple of things with the ending here. I thought, oh god, well, I know this is happening, but I didn't kind of know how I was going to get there with certain things, which is usually what I do, and it tends to come good. But I think I'm a big believer that you need those beacons out there that you're heading for. You can get lost along the way as long as you've got those beacons. And it's a lot of it is mapped out beforehand. A lot of it is made up as I go as well. It's a organic mix of the two.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much to Rob for chatting away there. Like I said, pretty spoiler heavy, but I hope if you did listen, it didn't ruin your enjoyment of the strip, because it was just such an interesting one to get our teeth into that I really couldn't resist. Next up is Alex de Campi. Talking about Full Tilt Boogie. Like I said, Full Tilt Boogie was a strip that ran in 2000 AD Regened, immediately popular, so Matt Smith, the editor of 2000 AD, decided to bring it into the Prog proper and commission a full series. A beautiful artwork by Eduardo Ocaña. So, great to talk to Alex, who's over in New York. Again, spoilers. not going to warn you again. So yeah, it was fantastic to be able to chat to Alex about a brand new series for 2000 AD. This was a strip that appeared in 2000 AD Regened last year.
Last year, yes.
And it was pretty popular. So tell us a little bit about the genesis of the strip, and we'll move on to how it's kind of gone on from there.
I mean, the genesis was Thard calling me up and saying, "Oh, do you have anything that's all ages?" And I kind of paused for a moment, thought up, what a Full Tilt Boogie had come together, which originally we weren't specifically thinking of it as all ages. And then I realized that we could change things around a bit. And make it suitable for all ages. It had a teenage heroine. There are other teenagers who come into it as major supporting characters. And so we said, sure. And I wanted to work with Ed Ocaña, the Spanish artist, on it for a long time. Ed and I have known each other forever. My first Humanoids series was with him, and it was my editor at Humanoids, who's now at Glenah, who introduced us, and we've just stayed friends ever since. And he's so good at drawing really interesting science fiction environments. And his character work he can draw a really broad variety of faces and bodies and, just interesting looking people with good expression. So, he was my first choice. And I was very pleased he was able to do it. But, the general idea of how Full Tilt Boogie came about is I grew up in America in Philadelphia. Outside Philadelphia, and the local TV channel broadcast nothing but old movies and badly dubbed anime. And so I grew up watching Gatchaman and Space Battle Cruiser Yamato, which in America were dubbed over as respectively Battle of the Planets and Star Blazers. And I watched they're just part of my DNA. These wonderful, big, fun, quite inventive space epics with a lot of neato stuff going on, but also a lot of really heartfelt character moments. And my aim for Full Tilt Boogie was to do something like that. I mean, there's things banging. I've got the windows open. It's hot. I'm on 49th Street in New York City, and for some reason they're choosing to make loud banging sounds across the street. There's a little bit of Captain Harlock in there too. So that was really what I was trying to do, was do something that, 9-year-old me would have really enjoyed. With teenagers getting to go off into the galaxy and do cool stuff. And I think it's interesting, so much of when Westerners do this sort of space epic, they're very much grounding it on either Star Wars or Star Trek. And those were not influences on Full Tilt Boogie at all. So I think that's possibly why people are like, oh, this is a little something different,
It definitely feels like there's much more of a true European influence to the strip, because when people talk about European influence on American and British comics, they're inevitably talking about Metal Hurlon. But BD, French and Belgian and Spanish and Italian comics are so much more than just heavy metal. There's Eduardo seems to have that has that quality of the kind of thing you would see on a supermarket shelf in France, for example.
Well, that's most where his work is published. So yeah, I mean, he brings a very European air to it. I think even on the writing side, we allow certain just wacky things to happen. Like there's a character in the book. There's a cat in the book, because all good spaceships should have a cat to catch the space rats, just as all good sailing ships would have a ship's cat. And this cat is named Cat, and it may or may not have a portal to another dimension in its stomach. And Cat, we never explain Cat. It's like for years they never explained Wolverine's origin. He's just Wolverine. She's just Cat. And people are like, well, are you going to say what Cat is? No. They just found this cat. It occasionally eats very large things. That's what it is. And I think you have to, there's this kind of acceptance of absurdity in the story, which makes me really happy. And you know, some of the things we had to change ended up making it more absurd because the story wasn't originally meant to be all ages. There were a few things I had to change because Thard was like, you can't really have people getting disemboweled like that in an all ages book. I am completely guilty of obeying the letter rather than the spirit of the age rating, but I think that's, you know, that's what we should all aim for. And so in the original episode that came out last year, there are robot bears that are running this debtor's prison where one of our main characters is imprisoned. And so we have a lot of robot bears get killed, which you can do. Whereas if they were human or a creature that actually bled rather than sparked, you can't kill them. So just in case you need to know, robot death, A-okay. Skynet is taking notes. So,
but this is very much in the spirit of original 2000 AD, because of course when action was banned, the violence was cited as one of the reasons why. So, you know, with 2000 AD, the whole point was it's not real people who are getting killed. It's
exactly.
Dinosaurs and robots and everything.
Yeah. So yeah, no, that was one of the things that happened. And you know, it's been a fun creative stretch to think of ways you could have people shooting at each other in non-violent, in non-lethal ways. I think there's a bubble gun somewhere which kind of entraps you in a bubble and you can float off. But you can also have a lot of things happening that you know, that are scary and harmful. And there's a lot of lying that there's a specific, in the coming arc, one of the things that happens, I kind of assemble this Super Sentai team, very much like Gatchaman, but not. And I always wondered, you know, I was always interested in what would happen if you had like a Super Sentai team, but they, you know, whoever was putting them together was completely lying to them and gaslighting them, being like, great, this is a great thing to do. You're going to go do this now. And they're teenagers. So they're like, well, you know, obviously we've been told forever and ever, this team's a great honorable thing to be chosen for. And this is a massive goal if you're in this particular strata of society. So this has to be all right. Yeah. The grown-ups are telling us this is okay. No. And some of the kids start to wonder, and that becomes a big problem.
With the original story that appeared in Regened, out of all of the stories, Full Tilt Boogie was the one that seemed to get the most response and seemed to have the most promise for further stories. I mean, we had, this might seem like a really stupid question, but were you surprised at the feedback that you got?
I was, yeah. I mean, you know, I never really think about how my stories will go over with an audience. I think if you spend too long trying to be popular to the audience, you then, you know, then if for some reason the story doesn't land, you know, you haven't really made yourself happy and you haven't made them happy. So, you know, it feels like a miserable experience. So I just, you know, I think one of the things that helped with Full Tilt Boogie was that we'd done so much world building in the background. Like, we didn't show you very much of the world because we had 10 pages. But there was this tremendous, like, there's this, like, you know, millennia long, like, conflict between these two different, you know, space nations. Then there's this kind of girl caught in the middle of it who accidentally kind of restarts it. And so there's this fun, silly little romp that's happening. There are a lot of mysteries that we don't bother to explain, that we figure we'll either explain later, or if this series doesn't go on, like, oh, well. So I think people were like, yeah, this is really interesting because I want to know more about these people. And I think delivering that much of a fully realized world, even if we didn't show it, was fun. And you know, like it's a teenager with her own spaceship. Like, what are the best things in life? Having your own spaceship, you know. So I mean, we were really delighted and humbled that like so many people were like, yes, we want this to come back. I always feel like I'm a bad 2000 AD contributor because I've been so busy. Like, I haven't had a ton of time to pitch things to Thard, you know, and I haven't exactly felt like, you know, like I haven't been pitching more Dredd because Rob Williams has been doing such a good job. I'm just like, Rob can take it away. And some of the other things I want to pitch, you know, like Slain will never be mine. So it was nice to find something I could do in the Prog.
It's one of the great difficulties with any creator in 2000 AD is coming up with a new series that they feel is going to have traction, because for all of the characters that have stood the test of time, there's still so many you could mention that have been and gone and haven't necessarily captured the imagination. Let's talk a little bit about Tia as a character, because again, teenage protagonists are very rare at 2000 AD. And I've seen some debate online about whether kids like reading about characters who are their own age, or they prefer reading about adults and what everybody's experience was when they were kids and all this, that, and the other. So let's just explore Tia as a character. Was it one that kind of popped up fully formed for you?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I wanted this girl, I wanted her to have some family around her, because I think it's a really cheap trick to just always orphan the teenage protagonist. So she travels with her grandmother, who is great, but also, requires some care. She has her cat, and she has a spaceship. And so she's just this girl who's trying to make money. And, you could do Full Tilt Boogie in a whole bunch of ways. You could almost do it as like a case of the week. She does, she's bounty hunting. She's trying to, odd job, essentially. She's like the gig economy in space. She's got the spaceship she needs to keep up. She needs to earn money. Nobody ever wants to pay her. And she's not like the world's best bounty hunter. I think the older I get, the more I get tired of hyper competent characters. Like, I don't want to read about the dude who's like so incredibly competent at everything, but like he's tortured because his wife was killed like 10 years ago, and since then he's never known peace. And I've seen this story so many times, and it leaves me with nothing. I love the William Goldman thing of like, find the least likely person and make them your hero. And she's good at things. Like, she's okay. She's just not great. She doesn't necessarily have the most fully formed plans. She kind of wings it. And the people she's working with aren't, in terms of the people hiring her, aren't very great either. And they're going to try to get out of paying her any way possible. So I think there's a lot of, I think people can kind of see themselves in her a little bit. And also, like, she still kind of has a fun job. Like I said, she's a teenager with her own spaceship. Like, it's basic. And in terms of like, do people really need to see a teenager? Could I have made her 35? I mean, probably, but I think there's something about, when you're a teenager, you think you know everything, and you really don't. And when you're older, you look back on yourself and you're like, holy shit, how did I stay alive? And so I think part of T's charm is that, like, the fact that her plans are a little shaky and she doesn't always think things through very well. It's not because she's dumb. She's not dumb. She's just a teenager. So if I made her 35 and she was like this, she'd come off as kind of like really flaky. But she's not. Like, she's holding things together really well for her age. But she's not holding them together in like a 35-year-old way. And I mean, I think it's funny that people are, do teenagers want to read about other teenagers? I mean, I think some of the most popular YA books are most popular with grown-ups. So I think grown-ups also kind of want to read about teenagers, I think a good story is a good story.
That's for every kind of, I call them Jack Reacher characters. So, the one who's handsome, lone wolf, very good at everything, knows everything that's going on. You're right. The YA does, as a genre, does have a tendency to have characters who are uncertain, who are kind of figuring things out, as indeed the vast majority of teenagers are at any given moment.
We're all figuring things out. I mean, I think that's partially the appeal of YA fiction for older readers, is that it incorporates this kind of existential, like, I don't know what's going on, and I don't know who I am as a person and what I want to be. And I think that's relevant for everybody. And I think a lot of, the Jack Reacher style grown-up characters don't scratch that itch for people. I mean, they have their own place, which is a power fantasy and a competency fantasy, of finding some sort of emotional catharsis in a character who's really good at everything and it has an answer for everything, whereas like we as humans aren't really good at everything and often are just winging it all the time and don't have an answer. So I think that the teenagers as characters fulfill that part of a need for us to see ourselves reflected back in story.
When Tharg came a knocking for some more Full Tilt, or a proper full series of Full Tilt Boogie, what was your reaction to that first and foremost? But also, how did you see things playing out? Were there kind of structural differences? There were things that you thought, oh, I better change this in order to make a full series.
I mean, I was delighted. I was just so delighted that people liked my weird little series. We were obviously switching from a 10-pager to 5 to 6-pagers, which required a little bit different scripting. And, a decision about whether I was going to fully close off this arc and end the series there, or whether I was going to leave things open. I mean, I think there's so, but again, I mean, this is, I had planned this out as such a large epic, with so many places for these characters to go and for them to grow. There is a satisfying conclusion. There's, I could very easily do another arc of it. I could very easily do several other arcs of it. It could become a recurring thing. I mean, the principle is that T accidentally finds the last survivors of this the main empire is the Luxine Empire, and she finds on some like frozen outpost that she crash lands on because of her plans to rescue this Prince Ivan, who she has a bounty on. Kind of went horribly wrong, and she finds the last remaining like war computer and warrior of the Anabite Empire, and the war computer is named Horus, and he's kind of rotten and senile, and still is like vaguely like, yes, we should conquer everything, and everyone's like, Horus, no. So there's a lot of questions of like whether Horus, and she trashes her spaceship, so she has to take theirs. So she accidentally, reawakens this millennia-old conflict with this empire that the Luxines had thought they had destroyed. And so she instantly becomes public enemy number one, though she doesn't really realize it yet, because back on Luxos, like alarms are blaring and they're choosing a Super Sentai force to go after her, and and warships are being deployed. And she's meanwhile trying to negotiate with the person who put the bounty on Prince Ethan to actually pay the fuck up. So you can see there's a whole bunch of this world and stories to explore based on these characters. And I think what I tried to do with the episodes in the Prog are, I mean, I'm quite a dense storyteller anyway, but Ed's got such a wonderfully detailed style that I kind of tried to remember to pull back about, at least once in each episode to give him some real space to design things and let us like soak in the atmosphere. Because, there's no point in having sci-fi unless you give us enough space to like look at the future and enjoy the spaceships. So I think first episode, and again, like I wrote most of this last summer, I think the first episode takes us back and shows us a little bit about it's a flashback to the very beginning, like a millennia before of this war. So there's a lot of like big spaceship action. But there's also a lot of like fun tonal shifts. I mean, it is very much based in a lot of anime storytelling and Miyazaki storytelling, where it's like, like giant space war, and then it ends with someone having noodles,
But that for me has always been one of the things I've loved about European comics, is that sense of the personal in the epic. So all the way from something like Jean Giraud's art, that always, despite how huge and epic it is, it always places a human being at the center of what he does, and
yeah, exactly. There's always someone there going, oh shit, like. like you're looking at it as a reader going, wow, this is epic. And it's really fun when the characters are like, wow, this is epic too. Like, you know, like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Versus like, oh, I've seen this a billion times before. It's fine. Like giant floating city, no problem, you know, rather than going, wow, this is the first giant floating city I've ever seen, you know.
How do you feel Tilt Boogie will sit within normal 2000 AD? Because the comic has always occupied an interesting place halfway between European comics and American comics.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
larger, higher panel count than American comics, you know, much less kind of like, I mean, there are the classic characters, but there's always been new stories coming up on a really regular basis, and American comics, you know, the big, you know, Marvel and DC don't do that as much, or they don't feel like not completely separate characters and stories. They always have to be tied into something that of their existing universe. 2000 AD is rare, and it has like many different universes within the magazine. I mean, having read 2000 AD regularly for a very long time, I mean, I think it'll sit just fine. I mean, there's always been the more hardcore stories, you know, the more violent and noirish stories. There's always been some of the comedy stories, you know. I mean, this will probably fit. You know, if Nikolai Dante fit in, which it did, this will fit in. You know, it's very much that same sort of action, but with some humor, but with some spectacle, space that we've had in 2000 AD. I mean, there's some of the giant space spectacle of the later Durham Red stuff, but less of the noir to it.
And in terms of your process, when you're planning stuff like this out, do you begin with a central premise and then plot it out? Do you just begin writing? Do you see where the idea takes you?
I mean, with this, I had a very messy, you know, I had this like long prose thing. You know, it wasn't a written piece of prose I could have delivered to you and would have made sense to you. But it's what I refer to as an outline, which is just basically a grab bag of thoughts arranged in vague story order. And from that, I was like, okay, here's what we're going to take. And, you know, I tend to work in three particular stages. There's an outline, which is what happens in the story. There's breakdowns, which is what happens per page. And then there's a script, which is what happens per panel. So it goes in those stages, and there are usually significant shifts between outline and breakdowns, and smaller shifts between breakdowns and story and script. And I write the whole thing. So I delivered all 10 episodes to Tharg and to Ed in one go. It wasn't like, here's episode 1, 2 weeks later, here's episode 2. And I do that because I know myself, and I know that like somewhere around episode 8, I'll want to go tweak something in episode 2. And if I've already turned in episode 2 and Ed started drawing it, I'm a real villain to be like, Ed, we got to fix 2 pages. You know, I won't do that to people. I'm not a good enough writer to go month by month or episode by episode. I really like just making sure I have the whole thing down before I turn it in. And especially with this, because I was sort of like, okay, well, how am I going to cut off a discrete 10 episode, 50 page, 52 pages? I think the first and last episodes are 6 pages. 52 page chunk of this giant space epic in a way that makes sense. Because I also had so we've introduced T, we've introduced the black dog, we've got Horace and the grandma and the cat. So like the first episode in Regened last year introduced a whole bunch of characters really quickly, and hopefully made them all feel like interesting individuals that you cared about. Then in going forward in this, we have to talk a little bit about the past so the present makes sense. And also just giant space battle, like why not? And I introduced the folks on the Super Sentai team and the selection of the Super Sentai team. So, and then things need to start going wrong for them. So we, there was a lot of planning. So like I think it's a pretty jam-packed 10 episodes. So I think there's a lot for people to enjoy. We try to have at least one great oh wow or oh shit moment in each episode. If I'm really on fire, I have both.
Do you see Tharg willing, of course, T's adventures continuing? Would you be happy for them to continue?
I'd love them to. Yeah, I'd love them to. I mean, because they have, I know exactly what happens from here on. It's not something that T's going to like very much. I mean, T just kind of wants to collect your money and go to a beach. There's this running joke about like, this isn't a beach, and it's not that she's an unwilling hero. She has no reason to go and do this stuff, but unfortunately, everyone around her is going to kind of propel her to go do a heroic thing that she really has no desire to do. But also, people are going to keep shooting at her unless she does it. So,
let's talk a little bit about, because you've got a lot going on at the moment.
Just a bit.
Tell us a bit about the project with Duncan Jones. The Kickstarter did fairly well.
All right. It did all right. The majority of our backers are British. Yep. Okay. So yes, I'm doing. I'm co-creating a book with Duncan Jones, who was the director of Moon and Source Code and Mute and Warcraft and, God willing, Rogue Trooper. We all hope so. Yes. He keeps going. He keeps promising that if I'm very nice, he'll let me look at the script for Rogue Trooper. Don't listen to that, Rebellion. You didn't hear that. And so he approached me via kind of mutual acquaintances. He'd been looking. The third book, the third story set in the same near future universe as Moon and Mute, was like a giant sci-fi like road trip story. He talks about it like, if Moon was a sort of a kitchen sink, very small film, and Mute was his noir film, this was his like Terminator 2 kind of big action adventure film. And being as it starred a woman at the time that he was trying to shop it around, producers were like, we don't really want to spend a bunch of money with this just being a woman-led story. And so it sat and eventually he decided he still loved the story and he wanted to do something with it. So he started looking at doing it as a comic, and he'd gone quite far down the line with another comic beforehand, in that there are like 70 or 80 pages of Glenn Fabry drawn Mute graphic novel, which exist and are owned by Dark Horse. And that book had fallen apart for a bunch of reasons based on that, it had never been finished. We're trying to get, it's a complicated situation with the Mute rights. But my editor at Dark Horse, because I had quite a strong relationship with Dark Horse, and I and Duncan are all kind of trying to make that book happen in some way. I mean, it'll never be finished as a graphic novel, but like doing a book about Mute and with some of the production art, and I'll letter all of Glenn's work, and it'll be great. So he had that, and because it kind of fell apart, he realized he needed a co-editor or a co-author to help him out. I mean, it's a big project. It's like a 260 page book. So various mutual acquaintances kind of put us in touch, and we just got along really well. We're both character writers. We both don't really have an ego about this. It's just like trying to express the story in the best way possible. And so, last summer I did the adaptation from screenplay to comic script with Duncan, me drafting the comic script on a Google Doc, him going in and, adding, subtracting, tweaking, etc. And we started lining up a group of artists. And because the story is a sci-fi road trip, and Duncan having had being a little bit shy of waiting for one artist to finish the whole thing, we decided to give each artist one of the locations. So you had different artists drawing like between 8 and 30-page chunks of the book based on a location. And they're the same like 3 or 4 characters throughout the book traveling through the location. And because of that, because these were fairly short commitments, and because Duncan was paying them their fair rate, which is very unusual in American comics, we managed to line up a really stellar group of artists. And it was a lot of my address books. So like, people I've known forever, like, Chris, I can see the copy of The Filth sitting behind you on your bookcase. And, Chris Weston was one of the first people we called. Rufus, Duncan said, "Oh, what do you think about this guy, Rufus Dayglow?" Like, I've been drinking with Rufus since I was, since I lived in London, like, a long time ago. And so I said, "Oh, he's wonderful." And so I messaged Rufus. And we pulled together a really interesting list of artists chosen for, it's very much a list of artists. And I'm proud of that. And we chose them for how well their art fit a particular section, plus how interesting their art was compared with the artist who was doing the previous section and doing the next section. Because you don't want like 3 artists in a row. It's like making a mixtape. You don't want 3 songs in a row that sound exactly the same. Okay? You want a really new song. You want a really classic song. You want something unexpected that turns out to be a hell of a banger. Like, you want to take it up, you want to take it down, different materials, different styles, etc. So we made this amazing mixtape of artists, essentially, and then we put the book on Kickstarter. And we had multiple publishing offers, and we eventually went with a publisher that was interested in us doing a Kickstarter as well. And this was all decided way before the pandemic. These things, publishing takes a lot longer than a lot of readers realize. So, any of you listening out there, any book you see, if you think, oh, they pulled this together this year. No, they've been pulling it together for the past 4 years. We did pull this together fairly fast. We had it, a large amount of it. We had like 50% of it done, I think, when we started thinking about the Kickstarter. Now it's about 75%. And I pushed for a Kickstarter. I'd done 2 Kickstarters before. And I was kind of like, look, we'll probably get our print bill footed ahead of time for free by Kickstarter backers. It'll raise the profile of the book. It's really hard to market books. There's a lot of noise out there. I can't believe I'm telling you this. You're like, he's nodding. It's not great for radio, but he's nodding. There are a lot of books out there. There's very little, people's attention spans are very short. It's hard to break through and get people to go to a shop and buy a book, even if they love it. Like, I love Witch Hat Atelier. All I have to do is email, Menachem, my comic shop guy at Escape Pod on Long Island, to be like, dude, stick volume 5 in the mail. Have I done that? No. It's even when you want to buy a book, sometimes you don't buy a book. And so I thought with Kickstarter, like, if nothing else, it would raise the profile of the book. And I feel the Kickstarter audience, a large part of the Kickstarter audience that is aside from the usual comic shop buying audience. And one of the things we wanted to do with this book, which is called Maddie, was get outside the American direct market. I love the American direct market, but they're going to know about the book anyway. Like, I have faith in comic stores being able to get the book and market it to their clientele. There are also sci-fi fans. There are also the people who don't read a ton of comics, but like comics, but don't go to comic shops and, would be into the idea of buying a graphic novel. And then there's just the Kickstarter audience of people who really like new, interesting stuff. So we put it on Kickstarter. And I actually got up at 5:45 in the morning last Tuesday, 10 days ago, to start the Kickstarter early so we could maybe get a little bit funded before Duncan woke up in LA. And also because, so we have a lot of fans in the UK and in mainland Europe and in Ireland. And we thought, well, it would be nice to give them first bite of the cherry, for example. We had a lot of, 24-hour early discount specials. And by the time Duncan woke up, we were half funded. We asked for $50,000. An hour later, we were fully funded. I think by the end of the day, we'd hit 100,000. We're now closing in on 300,000 in 10 days, a little over a week. It's going to slow down. But, the book is paid for. We're giving royalties to our artists, so like every buck we make goes into the pockets of our artists. Some of it does from now, from essentially when we hit our break-even mark onwards. Now the publishing quality is going to be really great. We've got various stretch goals, so it's been a really wonderful experience. It's completely eaten my life. It requires a lot of care and feeding, but it was fun. We're working with Z2, who I know, and are doing some really interesting things. Like they're doing a graphic novel with Mikey Way. They're doing the new Gorillaz book with Jamie Hewlett. I love them because they also look beyond the American direct market. Obviously they want comic shops to sell their stuff, but they don't look at it as like, oh, well, we're just going to do well in comic shops, because there's a much larger reader base for what they do. And they don't, and Josh, the head of Z2, when I first came to him, he'd be like, I want to do a Kickstarter. He's like, you're so funny, because like he'd gone to other creators and been like, hey, do you want to do a Kickstarter for your book? And they're like, no, I want to be real published. I've been real published, so I'm fine. I can understand where they're coming from. But I've been real published. It was fine. It was great, but I will sell a book in any way possible. If I can make a sale, I will do that. So, we're going to be real published, but also we're already in profit. We've already sold, almost 6,000 books. And we're only a little over a week into the campaign. So yeah, I was the weirdo who's like, yeah, let's crowdfund. And one of the things I really like about what Duncan had done is he'd already paid the artists out of his own pocket. So they were paid their asking rate within a week of their invoice, which is, truly how you win your way to a freelancer's heart, is pay them really quickly without them having to hassle you. So it wasn't like we were asking the artists to work for exposure or for low rates or anything like that. It's like they were sorted out. We weren't, there's a lot of projects where like the artists only get paid if you reach a certain amount on Kickstarter, or they're paid a very low amount. And we did not want to be those people. That was probably way longer than you wanted.
No, it's good. That's good. And fulsome, I think, is
there we go.
Yeah. In terms of you as a comic writer, because you've just published your first prose
novel, yes.
Yeah.
It's all happening in May.
Is this one of those things where this is just how everything turned out all together at once?
I had one book out in 2019. It was Archie versus Predator 2. I love that little book. But I don't work quickly. Everyone thinks I don't sleep and I work really hard. I do work really hard, but I just work very consistently. So I'm always working on something. I'm not spending a lot of time on it every day, but I'm always just like chugging away. It's just that sometimes in publishing, you can start a book in 2016 that you think is going to come out in 2019 or 2020, and then it comes out in 2021 alongside 2 other books you've written since. So a lot of publishing stuff is like release dates are simply out of my control. And you find, you really do find it's like the number 59 bus. It really is, So I have The Scottish Boy coming out in prose this year. I've got Maddie, True War Stories, and Dracula Motherfucker, my book with Erica Henderson, still my favorite title, coming out this year. Next year, I've got my second novel, Heartbreak Incorporated, which is coming out through Rebellion Solaris, keeping it in the family. I've got The Backups, which is a big YA graphic novel from Macmillan. Probably Reversal, which is another YA graphic novel from Dark Horse, and probably something else. Oh yeah, no, I've got another book that is not announced yet. So I have all these giant books coming out, but and Bad Karma might come out at the end of 2021. Yeah, I've got a series you can all download off Panel Syndicate, which is like this cool webcomic site that has that's very highly curated. It has books by creators like Brian Vaughan, Marcos Martin. Ed Brubaker's just dropped a new series there. Jay Farber, who writes most of Supergirl and a lot of the CW DC stuff, who's a great guy. David Lopez Ken Nimura, who I think won an Eisner for his book last year on Panel Syndicate for Best Digital Comic. But yeah, mine's called Bad Karma, and it's a military action thriller, but it's really, really heavily character based, and whatever you think it is, it's not. So like, have a look. It's a lot of fun. And it's me doing the least likely heroes, taking taking that like hyper competent special ops trope, like Extraction. That was a film, and just turning it on its head. And it's also based on. I was married to a Scots Guard officer for a long time. I actually knew a bunch of mercs and special forces guys. They're all dorks. Well, 95% of them are dorks, and we don't talk about the other 5%. So, so it's me writing about like the military as someone who knows a lot of people in both the U.S. and the British military, and what all low-key nerds they all are. But that's pay what you want. So if you're like feeling a bit pinched in the pandemic and you want to read a cool story, you can just download it for free. So Panel Syndicate, and all the comics on there are pay as you want. So you can just, you can have a bit of a little party for yourself and read a bunch of cool books.
I like your whole point about the kind of the unlikely protagonist, the person who doesn't really know what they're doing, because it really brings to mind somebody like Danny Franks from Bad Company, who for me is one of the best 2000 AD characters.
Charlie's War,
Exactly. This kind of, you're caught up. You are being propelled through a story and through a terrible situation, alongside somebody who is themselves being propelled. Is having to make instantaneous decisions, and come back to what we were talking about earlier. Those kind of characters for me are worth 10 times the guy who knows how to do everything. Yeah.
They're more fun. They feel more realistic. They feel more human.
Great stuff. Thank you so much to Alex, and also again to Rob for that. Hope you enjoyed this episode, Earthlets. The world is pretty grim at the moment. If you're facing challenges of your own, then best of luck. We're rooting for you. Stay safe. Look after one another, and we'll see you hopefully on the other side of this. But until next time, splendid Verthrig.
Alert! 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 Fill power levels dangerously high. Alert! Alert! Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the Galaxy's greatest comic at 2000adonline.com.